Chapter 2. Man, Science's Greatest Riddle. Know then thyself, presume not God to scan. The proper study of mankind is man. Placed on this isthmus of a middle state, a being darkly wise and rudely great, with too much knowledge for the skeptic side, with too much weakness for the stoic's pride. He hangs between in doubt to act or rest, in doubt to deem himself a god or beast, in doubt his mind or body to prefer, born but to die, and reasoning but to err. Sole judge of truth, in endless error hurled, the glory, jest, and riddle of the world. Pope's Essay on Man. The philosopher sits in the gallery of the theatre of life, looking down upon the play being enacted on the distant stage. It may be this exteriorized position which enables him to pass adequate judgment upon it all. Those who sit in the stalls at the passing show of this world have a nearer view than those who sit in the gallery, but they do not necessarily take a truer view of the play. The mysterious meaning of life means nothing to us. We do not permit such a problem to take entry into our consciousness. We like to relegate such an inquiry to philosophical old fogies or credulous old clergymen. The search for truth has become a bore. That which should provide us with a happy purpose is an unspeakable occupation and an unpardonable subject in polite society. God writes his message on the face of this round planet. Man, being self-blinded, is unable to read it. A few, having sight, interpret it to others. But the human mass sneers at them for their pains. Only the intuitive few among the cultured and intelligent and childlike simple ones among the peasants and workers receive the message and return love to the messengers. Therefore it is that the story of man's later history is read with tears and tragedy. But the complete story of humanity is neither a tragedy nor a comedy. No curtain falls, nor is there an end. Yes, mankind seems stricken with spiritual blindness and deafness, unable to read the mystic writing on the wall of this world, unwilling to listen to the few seers who can do this. We pass through our days stumbling and groping. Uttered warnings or wise counsel we dismiss, such as the fervid vaporings of cranks, such as the Jews dismissed Christ's pointed truths. In the result, men wander helplessly amid the bewildering chaos of today. We rise from this cradle of birth and grasp at life with passionate hands, but soon sink back into the passionless grave. Our little selves are all absorbed with the importance of our struggles and aspirations, our triumphs and defeats. Our luring possessions hold us captive, and we fret or fever ourselves on their account. We cannot help that, for we are human. But the Sphinx, rising out of the Egyptian sands and surveying the mortal race of men, smiles and smiles and smiles. Yet man is a rational being and instinctively craves for a rational explanation of things. He lives in a predominantly scientific and intellectual age. All his experience is interpreted by the light of a purely materialistic reason. But life appears to draw a hard line upon the map of his own nature, leaving a vast unknown land where reason seems unable to penetrate. Reading in one of Bertrand Russell's old essays his fine but pessimistic confession of faith, I take it as typical of the sterile attitude forced upon those scientists who refuse all hope of ever exploring the unknown land. He wrote, "That man is the product of causes which had no provision of the end they were achieving? That his origin, his growth, his hopes and fears, his loves and beliefs, are but the outcome of accidental collocations of atoms? that no fire, no heroism, no intensity of thought and feeling can preserve an individual life beyond the grave? That all labors of the ages, all the devotion, all the inspiration, all the noonday brightness of human genius are destined to extinction in the vast depth of the solar system? All these things, if not quite beyond disrepute, are yet so nearly certain that no philosophy which rejects them can hope to stand. Such are the pessimistic thoughts which find tongue today among the intellectuals of our race. We can see the achievements of the scientists all around us in the world today. We must always admire their developed intellectuality, but yet they can only teach us the ABC of life. They do not know the XYZ of it. Most of them are now frank enough to admit this, to confess their ignorance of the primal causes. Those who would have us fall back on common sense in these matters wish us to fall back on a pitiful reed. They forget that common sense, in so far as it is merely a general, uninstructed opinion, is sometimes synonymous with common ignorance. Where then can we go to learn the first letters of life's alphabet? We must go where humanity has always gone, where alone it can go. We must go to the seers and sages. Whilst the scientists have been searching the material universe for fresh facts, the seers have been searching their own selves and exploring their own minds for old truths. For they have come to realize that they can but recover the ancient wisdom of man. What the first seer found and recorded thousands of years ago, the last seer finds and agrees with today. But what the first scientists of the 19th century found and recorded, the last scientist of today laughs and flings aside. The latest results of science have already laid the frigid speculations of mid-Victorian scientists in the deep tomb. Yet the scientist is so sainted by the race today that unless and until he nods approval to each separate revelation of the seer, a process which has been going on under our very eyes in the last half-century, the pearl is thrown to the dust as false. Living scientists who can hardly be called dreamers now lend their names to the ideas of the seers. Bishop Berkeley's major doctrine was a similar view to that of the Indian absolutists. He asserted that all we know of the world is our reaction to it, our impressions of it. He made mind the measuring rod of the reality of our universe, and hence placed mind as the first and fundamental reality. Sir James Jeans, by some brilliant efforts, has shown how physical science, working from the idea that the material world is the basic reality, has nevertheless been forced to consider favorably this hypothesis of Berkeley's. The conclusions of Einstein and Whitehead have similarly helped to confirm the bishop's assertion. Jeans writes in The Mysterious Universe, "All those bodies which compose the mighty frame of this world may not have any substance without the mind." This Berkeleyan conclusion is again reinforced by Sir Arthur Eddington, the eminent physicist, who likewise pictures the universe as an idea of the mind of God. He even denies actuality apart from consciousness. Sir Oliver Lodge's work in physics, as well as his investigation into spiritualism, also points to man's mind as the reality in a world of vanishing matter. Our disdainful materialists dismiss this idea with a snap of their fingers. Those scientists who do accept it become, in colloquial language, cranks. It is noteworthy, however, that the latter are in the foremost ranks of their profession and have been led to acceptance only after prolonged and profound research. One may make a little prophecy and declare that a whole army of scientists is unconsciously treading in this direction. But we must free ourselves from the self-deception that the personality possesses a true standard of consciousness. We must first create within ourselves a true humility before we can know the liberating truth. We must enter, with Descartes, the clever Frenchman, into that frame of mind wherein he began one of his works. I have held much to be true, which I now discover to be false. I have no reason to suppose anything to be more certain. Possibly everything that I conceive and believe is false. What then is true? What is certain? Thus the old mechanistic conception of life, which was established by the founders of modern science from the 17th century onwards, has begun to die out in the laboratory and lecture room. The physicists themselves, once the proponents of the gospel of matter, have now become uncomfortably uncertain of physical phenomena. Their extended researches have shown them that what they once called inanimate matter can display certain properties which the textbooks lay down as hitherto considered peculiar to the organic alone. This is the tragedy of time. It tests all things and ideas and proves again and again the falsity of the current conceptions of the moment. When the craft of science took the winds of the 17th century with Bacon's carefully prepared compass, its crew would have been astounded had they been told in what strange waters it would be sailing in the 1930s. For the ship is bearing down on the harbor of those early philosophers who declared that time hardly has a separate existence, apart from the human brain, and that matter is the holding together of myriads of infinitesimal particles in an all-pervading ether. 19th century science pedestaled the theory that life is a product of matter. 20th century science is rapidly effecting a volte-face and is watching matter dissolve into electrons, into a mere collection of electrified particles which elude sight and sense. The step from this stage into the matterless world beyond is not such a far one, intellectually. Philosophy, once a sneered-at Cinderella, is now beginning to come into her own. Brilliant scientists like Jeans and Eddington have shown the inability of physical science to arrive at the nature of things without her help. If we survey the course of scientific and philosophic thought since the year 1859, when Darwin published his epical Origin of the Species, we may trace its descent deep into materialism during the last century, and its ascent toward a more spiritual interpretation of the universe during this century. The materialists who talk a mid-Victorian language in Darwinian accents are becoming unintelligible to the brighter generation of today, who have followed science into the strange findings of Jeans and Einstein and Lodge. When Einstein showed what a weird twist the sun's rays undergo before reaching our globe, the scientific lights which were guiding us dimmed a little, and men grew wary of jumping to conclude the obvious. So too, the psychology of 50 years ago looks a little woeful at the present time. The studies in abnormal psychology alone have played havoc with the seemingly sound explanations of that time. The new order of scientific inquirers who now concern themselves with problems of time and causality, especially the mathematical physicists, have opened up entirely new vistas. Einstein has also taught us to look upon time as another dimension, though we have hardly grasped the full import of this revolutionary idea. And if his later work is leading him anywhere, it is leading him to regard mind as the ultimate reality. We live in an age of applied science. Knowledge comes first, belief is but secondary. We probe every fact or event in this world with a searching why. There is a cause for every visible effect. The old times, when a baffling event was explained by a reference to the will of God or to the fiat of an angel, are gone, and gone for good. Spiritual truth must henceforth stand upon a scientific foundation. It must never be afraid of any question, and it must not dismiss the honest investigator as an irreligious because he wants proof before he will believe. During the closing decades of the 18th century and the opening decades of the 19th, a constellation of literary and scientific luminaries appeared in the European sky, which indicated and inaugurated the Age of Reason. God was dethroned, and reason became the throned sovereign of philosophy. Now science receives our highest worship. The scientist is the Pope of today and sits in the Vatican of world authority. We receive his learned revelation in a spirit of religious awe. We trust his pontifical pronouncements as once nearly all Europe trusted the creeds and dogmas of the Church. It is not the purpose of these thoughts to decry science, to cast contempt upon the vast structure of patiently acquired facts. I possess a profound respect for the intellectual abilities and patient character of the scientist. I believe his work has its right and useful place in life, but I do not believe that that place is the highest. The practical utility of the scientific method is not to be deprecated. Only the fool will scorn the wonders which science has given man, though we would do well to pause and remember Disraeli's perceptive remark that the European talks of progress because by the aid of a few scientific discoveries he has established a society which has mistaken comfort for civilization. The fact that the scientist has confined his attentions to the objective world does not reduce the value of his discoveries, but he has but to turn his attention inwards, to use the same methods of experiment and deduction upon the subjective world, to turn his searchlight of investigation towards the center of his own mind, and he will penetrate the sphere of the spiritual. Science has made the strides of a giant, but all her steps are in one direction, outwards, ever outwards. This is as it should be. Now the time has come to put an inside to her discoveries, to ensoul the forms she has created. Is the soul a mere academic concept, an intellectual plaything for professors to accept or deny? Is it only something upon which theologians may victoriously sustain their theses, and at which rationalists may fire their verbal shrapnel? At present, the scientist can find no chemical trace of the soul. He cannot make it register on any of his instruments, as he can make a gas register. But if chemical and mechanical reactions cannot be obtained, he need not therefore give up the quest baffled. Another way lies open. It may not be a conventional way, but it leads to the same objective, the discovery of the soul. If he loves truth better than convention, if he values the understanding of human life more than he values the understanding of a bit of rock, he will investigate that way. The method I propose to give is an extremely ancient one. It goes so far back in man's history that its origin is lost in the dim mists of antiquity. Yet let not this fact be a charge against it, for the ancients were giants in the understanding of spiritual mysteries, but infants in the study of physical science. The moderns are masters in the development of physical science, but novices in the understanding of spiritual mysteries. The great German philosopher Kant said that there were two outstanding wonders of God's creation. He said these were the starry heavens above and the mind of man within. Great as are the exploits of science in the external world, greater discoveries yet await in this century in the domain of psychology. Man will draw back startled when he understands the mysterious processes which occur within those inverted bowels of a bone we call skulls. Psychology, the science of mind and the study of consciousness, offers the most valuable rewards to true scientific research. No other subject is understood so little, yet means so much, for it holds the key to man's deeper happiness. Time will necessarily lift the idea of the soul out of the limbo of discarded theological notions into the grouping of scientifically tested propositions. But the science of that day will perhaps be as ready to utilize the mind as an experimenting instrument as today it uses the microscope. What are now regarded as the foolish illusions of mystics will then be verified truths of the science of parapsychology, to be publicly proclaimed without reserve. That the 20th century will unveil somewhat of this mystery, who that has followed the gropings of science can doubt. During its very first decade, the penetrating brain of the French thinker Bergson flashed the following prophetic message to his pen: to explore the most sacred depths of the consciousness, to labor in the subsoil of the unconsciousness, that will be the principal task of psychology in the century which is opening. I do not doubt that wonderful discoveries await it there. A leading scientist like Eddington tells us that the physical universe is an abstraction if it is not linked with consciousness. Mind is no longer to be regarded as a mere byproduct evolved by matter. The next and obvious step is to investigate the phenomena of consciousness, an investigation which was ridiculed half a century ago by Huxley because he regarded such phenomena as mere shadows attached to the real phenomena. This internal exploration is well worth while, for there is something within the mind of man and beast, something that is neither intellect nor feeling, but deeper than both, to which the name of intuition may fitly be given. When science can truly explain why a horse will take its drunken rider or driver for miles through the dark to find its own way home, why field mice seal up their holes before the cold weather comes, why sheep move away to the lee side of a mountain before severe storms, when it can tell us what warns the tortoise to retire to rest and refuge before every shower of rain, and when it can really explain who guides a vulture many miles distant to a dead body of an animal, we may learn that intuition is sometimes a better guide than intellect. Science has wrested from the clasp of nature some astonishing secrets, but thus far it has not discovered the source of intuition. Intellect, which is able to propound a multitude of enigmas concerning man, destiny, and death, is unable to solve them. When science shall have conquered the world, and the last glimmer of the last mystery shall have died out, it will still be faced with the greatest of all problems. Man, dost thou understand thyself? I would like to have lived in Athens at the time when one could wander into a marketplace and hear a certain snub-nosed, pugnacious man, one Socrates, cross-question the public men of the city, and repeatedly pose them this favorite question of his. A man like Socrates does not die, and his sublime character outlives the grave. When all the latest literatures have been examined, and all the earliest papyrus have been exhumed, we shall find no wiser precept than the Delphic oracle's injunction, "Know thyself," and the Indian rishi's counsel, to inquire into the self. These words, though older than all the mummies of the British Museum, might have come from the typewriter of a modern thinker. The ages cannot kill a truth, and the first man who phrased it will find his echo right down through the centuries. We live on a whirling ball in space, positioned somewhere in the great sky between the star of Venus and the star of Mars. There is something in this for man to think about, and something at which to laugh. He has measured with undeniable accuracy the mileage between his own planet and the two stars, although the distances are so tremendous as to beggar imagination. Yet he is unable to measure the extent of his own mind. He is a mystery to himself, a mystery which remains unsolved even when death's bitter waters come lapping to his feet. It is not ironical that the soul of a man should seem less open to investigation than the earth on which he abides. Is it not passing strange that he should have been too busy with the world without to have troubled his mind about the world within until lately? Why should he worry how the universe works? He does not have to run it, anyhow. He does not have to run himself. He does have to run himself. The The solar system turns without thine aid. Live, die, the universe is not afraid, wrote that clever thinker Zangwill. Man, however, hardly appreciates this pointed truth. He knows more about the workings of an automobile than he knows about the workings of his inner self. Yet the ancients taught, and a few of us have confirmed their teaching, that there is a stratum of his consciousness which bears the richest vein of all, pure gold. Should he not make this his chief concern? Compared with its other results, modern science has discovered very little about the nature of man, even though it has discovered how to harden metals, how to drive a half-ton shell into the next city, and 100 lesser things. During the last 3 centuries, man's knowledge of the physical world has grown with amazing acceleration, but his knowledge of himself lingers far behind. We can build giant bridges to span rivers of monstrous width, but we are unable to span the simple problem of who am I? Our railway engines will traverse a whole continent with ease, but our minds cannot traverse the mystery of self. The astronomer brings the farthest star to the site of his observatory, but he himself would bow his head in shame if you ask him whether he has brought his passions under complete control. We are full of curiosity concerning our planet, but we walk indifferently by the mention of self. We have gathered highly detailed information about almost everything under the sun. We know the work, qualities, and properties of almost all the objects and phenomena of this earth. But we do not know ourselves. The very persons who have been studying all the sciences have yet to study the science of self. The very men who have discovered the why and wherefore of the lives of tiny insects do not know the why and wherefore of their own lives. We know the value of everything, but we do know our wonderful value. We have packed the encyclopedias with thousands of pages concerning thousands of things. But who can write an encyclopedia about the mystery of his own self? Why is it that the thing which interests every man most is himself? Because self is the only reality of which we are certain. All facts of the world around us and all thoughts in the world within us exist for us only when our own self becomes aware of them. Self sees the earth and earth exists. Self is conscious of an idea and the idea exists. Berkeley, by the process of acute thinking, arrived at the same position. He showed that the material world would be non-existent apart from some mind to perceive it. What then is self? There is no secret in the mysterious book of nature which, with time and patience, cannot be read. No lock has been made but has its fitting key, and we may oft judge the handicraft of nature by the handicraft of man. The study of the self will one day prove the master key to open all philosophical doors, all scientific conundrums, all life's locked problems. Self is the ultimate. It is the first thing we know as babes. It will be the last thing we shall know as sages. The greatest certainty in knowledge comes only in the sphere of self. We can know the world and its objects only through instruments and our senses. But that which reads those instruments and uses those senses is the self. Therefore, we are beaten back to this position in the end, that the study of self is the most important study to which any thinker can give his mind. A sophist approached one of the wise men of ancient Greece, and thought to puzzle him with the most perplexing questions. But the sage of Miletus was equal to the test, for he replied to them all without the least hesitation, yet with the utmost exactitude. 1. What is the oldest of all things? God, because he has always existed. 2. What is the most beautiful of all things? The universe, because it is the work of God. 3. What is the greatest of all things? Space, because it contains all that has been created. 4. What is the most constant of all things? Hope, because it still remains with man after he has lost everything else. 5. What is the best of all things? Virtue, because without it there is nothing good. 6. What is the quickest of all things? Thought, because in less than a minute it can fly to the end of the universe. 7. What is the strongest of all things? Necessity, which makes man face all the dangers of life. 8. What is the easiest of all things? To give advice. But when it came to the 9th question, our sage pronounced a paradox. He gave an answer which I am certain his worldly wise querent never understood, and which to most people will give only the most superficial meaning. The question was, what is the most difficult of all things? And the Meletian sage replied, to know thyself. This was the bidding to ignorant man from ancient sages. This shall be the bidding yet.